But my name is Vanessa Hintz. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. Previously, I was in private practice, and now I'm doing a very different job. But this session is on the role of empathy in racial justice and healing. So a lot of the work that I do professionally is in the realm of racism, anti-racism, particularly anti-Black racism, and how we can really work to be more equitable. So without further ado, and I'll definitely introduce myself in a much more dramatic fashion as we continue on. But first and foremost, before we start in with the session, just to give an overview of sort of like the structure and what it'll be like. So, hey y'all, I see y'all walking in. What's up? So the way the session will be structured is I'm gonna talk for maybe like 40-ish minutes. And then we will definitely try to leave time at the end for folks to ask questions as they come up. I don't really know how the chat works and all of this, so I'm going to try my best to monitor all these several chats that we have. And for folks in the room, if you all need to ask a question, please feel free to do so. Hopefully we're all good. Hopefully anybody who's in person is hearing what I'm saying. Awesome. So before we get started, I definitely just want to do some context setting to be sure that we are sort of all on the same page about what we're going to be talking about. So first and foremost, just do a land acknowledgement to acknowledge that here in Milwaukee, we are on occupied territory of the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and Potawatomi folks. First Nations.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm just gonna make sure everything's all good. Hey y'all, new people on Zoom, what's up? So again, just acknowledge that we are all on occupied territory. And like I said, here in Milwaukee, that's the occupied territory of the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and Potawatomi peoples. Also want to acknowledge that the legacy of racism still persists today. So we are very much still in an inequitable society. And so I ask for strength from my ancestors to continue in this fight for liberation and equity and justice for all, because we still got a lot of work to do. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So this is what we will be going through and talking about today. So we're going to first start with talking about issues of racism and racial identity. And so really setting the context for our discussion around how do we utilize empathy to really be more equitable in the work that we do. We're going to talk a little bit about empathy. What is that? What does that look like? Because I definitely feel like there are some, what's the word? Misunderstandings, I guess, about empathy. So we're going to talk about empathy and emotional intelligence. I'm going to provide some different resources. And like I said, hopefully have more time at the end for folks to ask questions as needed. Cool. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought somebody had a question. Okay, cool. It's so weird, like being away and other people are there. It's so weird to me. I can also see that something's happening in the room there. I don't know if I should like keep going or if I should wait until they figure out whatever's happening tech-wise. I don't know. Is anybody that's present on the Zoom, is anybody here like from the conference staff? Nope. All right, I'm just gonna keep going then. So just to introduce myself and a little bit more about me and what I do. So I'm a psychologist, as I mentioned, and as a psychologist, I tend to, being educated at the doctoral level, I tend to find myself as like the only person of color in many spaces that I'm in professionally, especially in this region of the country, I tend to
Yeah,
find myself.
yeah. This is an output, right?
Sorry, I got distracted. But I tend to find myself as the only in certain spaces, which just makes, just moving through the world professionally, it's like a whole situation. I'm a biracial Black woman, so I'm a Black person with a white mom. And I think sometimes it took me a long time to be able to say that with any sense of confidence, with any sense of, feeling okay with it. So um, take that for what it is. I'm also a wife in an interracial relationship, which I think, again, in this region of the country, but I think also anywhere in America is still a big to do. And so it definitely affects the way that we, again, even live our lives and move through the world. I'm a super nerd. You can't really see now because this slide is covering up all my fun things behind here, but I definitely like to infuse popular culture into the work that I do, into all the things. And so I love pop culture. I love all the nerdy things. October is like my favorite month because this is the month where we can talk about scary movies and it's cool. I'm also a millennial, loud and proud. I know that millennials get blamed for a lot of stuff that we didn't do. So I'm just here to say we didn't do that. Don't be mad at us. And then lastly, two things that I value wholeheartedly are balance and intentionality. So being able to really live my life in that way and hope that um, I sort of live those values out in all the work that I do. So the reason that I introduced myself in that like very dramatic way is because I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about throughout the course of this discussion are very personal. Like issues of race, issues of identity are deeply personal things. And so I think it's important for you all to understand and know me on a somewhat personal level, in a way that's not weird. So hopefully that wasn't weird. So um other piece of context setting that I want to do before we get started is to really, again, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is very personal. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about can bring up a lot of feelings, and as a psychologist I love all the feelings. Please feel free to feel how you feel. I ask that any feelings that come up for you in the course of our conversation, that you really lean into those, because I think those really are reflective of where we all are in our individual journeys. And so I ask you to just lean into whatever feelings you are, even if they're the bad feelings, even if they're the feelings we don't necessarily like anger or sadness or guilt. So I think expressing any of those feelings can be healing. It can be beneficial. What is often not beneficial is disrespect. And so I'm just going to ask that we all maintain a level of respect. I also want to acknowledge that when we're talking about issues of race and racism and oppression, the enemies that we're talking about are not individual people. Even if we rounded up all the racist white people and put them somewhere, we would still have these issues, because a lot of the issues that we have around racism and oppression are systemic in nature. So even if we rounded up all the terrible people, we would still have the prisons industrial complex. We would still have the equity, the wealth gap, the achievement equity gap. We would still have all these things. Those aren't based on people. Those are systemic. And so I think it's important for us to, again, to understand that this fight against racism is systemic in nature. And yes, we are working to change hearts and minds, and we're absolutely hoping to, um, again, change systems and structures. The other thing I want to sort of announce at the outset is that people of color are not free from, bias and having stereotypic, thoughts. People of color are not free from, holding those negative thoughts about other groups. And so no matter how you identify, whether it's as a person of color or some other sort of marginalized group, we sort of all have room to learn and grow. And lastly, the last thing I'll say is that it's important to understand that people are sort of these unique combinations of social identities. So no one group of people is a monolith. So as I mentioned, I talk a lot about, Black people and sort of anti-Black racism. And I'm never going to talk about Black people as if they're all the same, because they're not. Nor should we think about a group of people as all the same. Questions? Sorry, it's so weird all of this. So the last thing I'll share before we get into sort of like the crux of the conversation is this is taken from the work of Glenn Singleton,
So
Courageous Conversations About Race.
to figure that out. She was presenting to the other people the whole time, so that's
Whatever.
yeah.
Well, my 202E was a guy in person presenting with virtual people.
Sam, are you able to mute?
Figure out the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we ended up just
weren't
taking
set for
the
anything.
10-foot HDMI from the presenting laptop and just running a 50-footer back to the Mac.
Yeah.
And using the USB audio.
Are they all good? And
Yeah, that should be good.
what was going on in there? What was going on in there?
Did someone keep muting themselves?
Yeah.
Sam, are you able to mute, Sam?
Yeah, that's us. Sorry.
No? All right, I'll just keep going. So the last thing I want to share in this bit of context setting is around the work of Glenn Singleton, so Courageous Conversations About Race. So as we engage in this conversation, as we move forward, I invite you to do all four of these things. The first being stay engaged, whatever that looks like for you. I know some of us are virtual, some of us are in person. I don't know what's going on. I can't see nobody, but you know what? It's okay. I'm just gonna believe in my heart and mind that we're all in this together and that we're all engaged. The other thing I invite everyone to experience is discomfort. And discomfort is very different than psychological harm. So I don't want anyone to feel harmed by anything that we do or talk about today. Because again, harm, there's nothing helpful about that. Discomfort is a catalyst for change. So that is something that I invite. I also invite everyone to speak their truth, whatever that looks like. You are one of one. There's no one else in this world like you. So your truth is your own. So I invite you to lean into that and be honest about how you feel and what you're thinking. And then lastly, expect and accept non-closure. So we ain't gonna solve nobody's problems in this hour that we have together. So you will likely leave this space with more questions than answers. You will likely leave this space feeling more discombobulated than you came into it. And that's okay. We want to expect and accept that these things are likely going to happen and just move forward. So I definitely want to hear from you all about what you think about just sort of the current state of race relations in this country. So I do have a poll. I don't know if it's going to let me, but let me see. I don't know if it's going to let me do this poll. Let's see, hold on one second. Yes, I can. So this is actually a, can you all see that? What? That was tight. I didn't know I could put it next to me like that. So we're gonna do an interactive poll. So you can either, let me get it started. You can either scan this QR code or you can go to this website, slido.com. So that's SLIDO.com. Once you get to that website, it's going to ask you for an event code. And I'm going to put this in the chat too. I don't know who's going to see this because I don't know where people are at. But you can either scan this code at the top with the sort of camera on your phone, or you can go to this website, again, SLIDO.com. When you get to that website, it's going to ask you for an event code. And our code for today is 782-820, 782-820. And when you get there, again, I just want to hear from everyone about what word you feel like you would use to describe the current state of race relations in this country. So if somebody said like, hey, what's it like to live in America for people of color? What would you say? And I'll just invite everyone to thank you very much, whoever responded. Appreciate you. And this is a word cloud. So as the responses come in, they'll show up on the screen as you see. And the responses that are
from this, yeah, from this side, smoking me.
I'm gonna invite everybody to mute. Make sure we're all on mute. I don't want nobody to say anything embarrassing that then comes back to haunt them. So just invite everybody to mute as we continue on with this poll. Thank you all very much for your participation. Appreciate it. All right, we're gonna give it like another minute or so, and then we will continue on. There's one more question that I definitely want to hear from you all about, and then we will continue on. And again, I just invite everyone to make sure that they're on mute. Make sure that your device is muted, whether that's a phone, computer, iPad, whatever. Just make sure you're on mute.
Set up an app so they would be able to change it. Yeah, because we were getting some feedback in the room about 2 or 3.
All right. Question number 2. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you. Question number 2 is going to be related to the conversation that we have today. So what is it that you hope to gain from this conversation that we have today? And I'll give it about a minute or so.
Oh,
Guidance. Appreciate you. Knowledge. We're about to drop all the knowledge. Just kidding. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Appreciate you all and your participation, and I appreciate you all rolling with these punches, with this technology, because this is just our life now until we can all be together safely. We give it just about another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. Oh, yes, be a better advocate. Whoever said that, okay. That's what I'm talking about. All right, so that that poll will be up for you all throughout the presentation. And so when we get to the Q&A portion, if there is something that you would like to ask, but you don't necessarily want to say it out loud, you would like to submit your question anonymously, you have access to that same poll to do so. And so, again, I'm going to start with talking a little bit about racism, racial identity, because in order to understand, you know, inequity and sort of what needs to be done, I think, again, we need to contextualize issues of racism. And I know there are a number of ways to talk about racism. This is the way I'm going to sort of ground it in our discussion. And so hopefully ain't nobody going to arrest me for talking about critical race theory, but I'm going to say something about it right now. So critical race theory really talks about this idea that racism is deeply embedded in our society. So as I mentioned at the outset, even if we rounded up all the racist people and put them in a rocket and sent them to the moon, we would still have these same issues, because racism is not about, it's not necessarily about individual people, it's about the systemic structures that are inequitable. And one of the most inequitable systems in this country is the education system. And so you talk, we're talking about K through 12 and higher education. And so the education system is by far one of the most hostile places in America for people of color, for students of color. And if you think about this, you know, students of color, children in America are required by law to go to school. So children of color are required by law in this country to go into a place where they are treated poorly, and they know it. Children of color are aware that they're treated differently than their white counterparts. And so again, you think about the fact that this is a law, this is something that's required by law for all students to attend school, a place that we know, according to research and according to statistics, is openly hostile. And so, as I mentioned, the very logic that dictates life in this country is it's inherently racist, and it's inherently rooted in systems of supremacy, of white supremacy. And for so long, these systems have been maintained because because of a number of reasons. One is because I think that people who want to do something, so I am speaking specifically about, you know, white racial allies, or people who call themselves allies. I think people want to do something, but people also don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to disrupt the status quo. They don't want to lose any semblance of power that they have. And so I think that a lot of that has really caused us to be in a place of stagnation, of stuckness, where issues of race and racism are concerned. And so that sort of informs the way that I do these presentations, that I talk to folks about issues of race and racism. I'm not trying to make nobody feel no kind of way. I'm also not trying to maintain the status quo. So my hope is that, again, in this conversation, we can be open and honest and transparent about what's going on. And so one of those things I think it's important to be open, honest, and transparent about is this issue of microaggressions. And so microaggressions, I'm sure, unless you live under a rock, that you've heard about microaggressions in some way, shape, or form. Microaggressions, and in this term, in this sense, I want everybody to understand that micro does not mean small. What micro refers to in this sense is the micro level of interaction, which is basically from one person to another. So we have macro levels of interaction where we're talking about like systems and structures and society, and we have micro level, which is person to person. And so when we talk about racial microaggressions, we're talking about things that occur between two people. Now, a microaggression is it can be verbal or behavioral. So it can be something that is said, or it can be an action that is taken. It can be intentional or otherwise. Regardless of any of those things, what microaggressions do is they communicate derogatory, discriminatory attitudes about people in a certain group. So racial microaggressions communicate negative, derogatory attitudes about minoritized folks or people of color. And no matter if you meant to or not, microaggressions negatively impact the person who is aggressed. So if you experience a microaggression, you're negatively impacted in some way psychologically. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that structure looks like. But before we do, I just want to play a very, very short video. I really hope this sound comes through because I don't really understand what's going on with this whole virtual situation, but hopefully the sound comes through. I also want to warn everybody that this video has 2 cuss words in it. So I apologize in advance if anybody is offended by curse words. I'm sorry. But I'm going to play this short video that really gives, it really demonstrates microaggressions and how damaging they can be, even though when they happen, they can seem very sort of, what's the word? Insignificant. So I'm going to really try to play this and hope that the sound comes through. Oh, hold up. Sorry, this is YouTube, so there's an ad. Can y'all hear this?
Friends would walk up to me.
Oh my God, this is another ad. My bad, y'all.
And I would just tell them that's my.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well spoken.
Oh, just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while.
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date.
Do you know who all these people are on this dinner list? I see 2 numbers on here. I don't know who they are.
You're gonna have a baby.
Watching TV.
322 number and then 213 number.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
So we got.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
So one of them is shooting.
I'm getting bit by
I'm
mosquitoes
assuming that the other one.
Touch your hair.
multiple times a day.
So pretty.
Can I touch it?
It's fucking annoying. That makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes. It seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
Mosquito bite, who cares? Just another angry black one.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
My dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
It looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear that. I'm just assuming everyone could hear that because nobody said they couldn't. So hopefully everybody could hear that. But again, that's just gives an example of, for people of color, again, just moving moving through the world every day, just before we even add anything else onto this, right? Before we even talk about any other mental health concerns, being impoverished, before we talk about any of that, just being a person of color moving through the world, you're subjected to these things. And so again, in some senses, people don't understand that all of those different microaggressions compound. And like you saw in the video, you just want to go in on somebody because again, this is something that we deal with every single day, all the time. And so what we see then is that, again, microaggressions happen all the time, every day. It doesn't stop. And so over time, we develop strategies for dealing with this. We develop strategies for coping with this. And it works. It works for a little bit. And then what happens is we get tired of that. Like the thing that previously worked for us that really helped us to cope with these issues, it doesn't work anymore. And if you think about that in the context of, I like to use when we were all in lockdown last year, what people were doing at the beginning of quarantine to really make sure that they could get through the day, when we was all at home, it was like, everybody in the house together. There were certain things that we did to cope with that. And then when we got to like month 6, month 7, month 8, those things didn't work anymore. And so our coping mechanisms were exhausted. And in the issue, when we're talking about this from the perspective of race and racism and race-related issues, experiencing these microaggressions, we cope with them for a little bit, then we get tired of coping, and then we have what we call race-related stress. Now, race-related stress is different than other types of stress because it is chronic. So again, this is something that's all the time, every day, it doesn't stop. There is a historical emphasis. And so again, the racism that we're experiencing is the racism that our ancestors experienced. And this is the same thing we've been dealing with for 400 plus years. And so there's like what's the word? There is a fatigue with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sick of this. Why we got to talk about the same thing all the time and nothing ever changes? The other thing that's different about race-related stress is this ambiguity. So like with the microaggressions that we saw present in the video, right? Like sometimes we have to double check, like, did they really mean that or am I just tripping? Like what they said made me feel some kind of way. Did they mean to do that or like what's happening here? And so there's this whole process of checks and balances that we go through with ourselves every time we are sort of confronted in this way, this way that communicates, negative stereotypical attitudes. And so again, race-related stress is also different because it doesn't have to happen directly to you. There are racism-related events. There's vicarious racism. So again, last summer, I don't know how many times, when they were showing George Floyd's murder on every single news channel at every single hour, I don't want to see that. I have never watched that video, nor do I ever want to see that video. Vicariously, that's traumatic. And so again, that didn't happen to me. I don't know him. Like, you know what I'm saying? I didn't know him, but that is still traumatic and that still affects me in a certain way. And so again, race-related stress is different because it doesn't even have to happen directly to me for me to feel that stress. And over time, what happens is race-related stress can compound because again, as I mentioned, racism is constant. It doesn't stop. Nothing ever I don't want to say nothing ever happens. Like I'm like, so like we will never change. I have a small sliver of hope. But anyways, racism is constant. It's all the time, every day. And so over time, race-related stress can compound into racialized trauma. And we understand that trauma affects the body it's basically like stress on caffeine. It affects our body in a way that is much more significant. I don't want to say significant. I will say significant. It's much more significant than stress. It affects us holistically too, biologically, psychologically, and socially. So arguably, people of color are walking around with trauma histories just for being who they are. And that's before we even add on all of the other stuff, before we even add on any sort of mental health concerns, before we add on anything else, there's trauma just being a person of color in the world. And we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, which I'm not going to belabor because I want to, because of the time. But intergenerational trauma, again, really expresses this idea that because of what our ancestors dealt with, we are affected by that today. So intergenerational trauma is trauma that's inflicted on a group of people who share a group identity or affiliation. So for Black Americans, for African Americans, intergenerational trauma is rooted in enslavement. For Native Americans, intergenerational trauma is rooted in the very founding of America and Columbus and them and all that they did, right? For Jewish people, intergenerational trauma is rooted in the Holocaust. And so basically intergenerational trauma it argues, this sort of concept of intergenerational trauma argues and research supports that we are still feeling the effects of, again, the atrocities that our ancestors suffered. And that is biologically, psychologically, and socially. So there's different DNA markers in our brain, all these different things that arguably can be traced back to, again, the horrors and atrocities of what happened before. These are 2 books if you want to read more on intergenerational trauma. Again, this is focused specifically on Black trauma. So post-traumatic slave syndrome and urban trauma, both excellent books, both written by Black women, dope, where they talk a little bit about frameworks for understanding intergenerational trauma. And so I want to move into talking more specifically about privilege, which again, I know is a prickly word for some people to talk about white privilege. And again, I don't intend for it to be so. I do intend to talk about it in a way that really, so we can understand this logically. So how did we get here? Or what logically, what is the logic that underlies like supremacy, ideas about, supremacy and privilege? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of ethnocentric multiculturalism, which is just a whole lot of words. So we're not going to say that no more. But we're basically going to focus on these 5 components, the first 4 of which sound exactly like what they are. So you think about belief in superiority of the dominant group. So in America, again, the very essence of white supremacy is this belief that, white is right and white is dominant. Whether that, I'm not here to say that that's right or wrong. I'm just here to say that it is what it is. Like that basically is the logic that sort of dictates, again, life in America. And logically, if you believe that one group is superior, there's this belief that other groups are inferior. And so you have white people and everybody else. And again, these are beliefs. I'm not saying this is how it is. This is how people think. The other thing that sort of is present is this power to impose standards. So as I mentioned before, racism is about systems and structures. And so the fact that prisons are overrun by Black and brown people, that's about power. That's about power. That's about number 4, too, manifestations and institutions. So racism does not only exist on a personal level. So somebody calling me the N-word, racism exists in institutions. Racism exists in going to get a bank loan. Racism exists in going to the grocery store and applying for college and all of these different things. It's manifested in different institutions. And then lastly, when we think about ethnocentric multiculturalism, we have this concept known as the invisible veil, which is this idea that people in power, so in this case, white people, have this understanding that everybody experiences the world in the way that they do. So do we call this the invisible veil? So this whole mentality of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, if I did it, you can too, is a manifestation of the invisible veil, which is I don't see color, is a manifestation of the invisible veil. If I did it, you can too. What's different about me and you? Well, there's a lot different. And so those 5 things put together really are sort of like the underlying logic structures that sort of maintain these systems of supremacy. And you can see in the blue box here, I don't know how big I am, and I don't know if y'all can see that box, but in the blue box here, you can see that there have been different historical manifestations of these very components. Again, we talked about colonization and Columbus and them. What we talked about enslavement, the genocide that Native Americans experienced, the very erasure of their culture, the forced internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the way that the Bill of Rights is unequally applied, the killing of unarmed Black people, all of that, one would argue, is a manifestation of these 5 components of ethnocentric multiculturalism. And so I'm going to show one more video, and I really hope this sound works because y'all, this video is powerful. And this is a spoken word piece about privilege. And I just want to, again, warn everyone that there are curse words in it. So I really hope that doesn't offend. But there are a number of curse words in it. So please, if that offends you in any way, please, I just invite you to walk away or not listen. So we will watch this video again that really centers this idea of privilege, and then we will move forward. Again, and I apologize if anybody's offended by the curse words.
We learned your French. We learned.
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With Grammarly, you can find.
Sorry.
Learned your English, we learned your Spanish, we learned your Dutch, your Portuguese, your German. You learned our nothing, you called us stupid. That's white privilege. And I'm sure it probably hurts for you to hear those two words, kind of like gunshots and explosions from those commissioned to protect you with whisking past your ears. What is white privilege? It is the only 5 decades of legal acknowledgement expected to correct 400 years of white transgression. It's crack versus cocaine. Blacks receiving almost 20% longer sentences for the same exact offenses. Like, for instance, a black man without a record is less likely to get a job than a white felon, or maybe it's because we're lazy and we don't work hard enough. Like, what the fuck? 400 years in the same field literally is an incredible resume builder. It is Katrina answering the government's prayers of eugenics, Dick Cheney going fishing the next day, Condoleezza on a shopping spree, Bush in San Diego, but Kanye is the one you call crazy because, like, it only took the USA 2 days to get aid to Asia, but 5 for FEMA to get to Canal Street and Esplanade is the one black kid who beat the shit out of the odds, but only thanks to Sandra Bullock, Michelle Pfeiffer, and the White Shadow, so now we all can make it. It's the only time thousands of white people are cheering for the black kid to win is in the stadium. It is you looking at me crazy if I told you to go back to Europe, even though we didn't have a say. It is you all of a sudden having a problem with immigration, like this isn't even your nation. How the hell do you discover some shit that wasn't even missing to begin with, you Columbus, our traditions? Had white girls twerking in high definition, multicolored hair, and purple nails, but it was ghetto when we did it. Oh, I make you uncomfortable. Try a quick slave ship, but wait. Slavery is over now. It's just called the prison system because, like, you're not racist because you don't use the N-word, but y'all use niggas every day. What is white privilege? It is the acceptance of bombs over Baghdad, but not over Boston. It is European history being taught as a major and African as an elective. It is learning about my people only 28 days, like I'm not black every fucking second as every white boy. But to fuck my brains out, not because I'm pretty, but because I'm pretty for a black girl. It is people thinking that Africa is one nation. It is the waving of the Confederate flag like you didn't lose the battle and then telling us to get over slavery. It is people saying that black people destroyed neighborhoods, but forgetting that white people have destroyed continents. It is every time I bring up my plight, some white man has to tell me that I'm crazy, but is kind enough to praise my English or say that we're all given the same opportunities, even though he has a family history of wealth. And I don't even know my family history at all. Is the justification of police brutality. Like, what did that person do? I'm sure it doesn't hurt as much when the victim doesn't look like you. It is people thinking that affirmative action is an unfair advantage instead of keeping the qualified from being unfairly disadvantaged or throwing out a qualified applicant because their names sound too African American as Newports imported into black communities, but black boys exported for weed as big plastic asses that are called fat when we naturally have them. It is an Australian woman whose new classic of rap music is everyone who hears this poem dismisses all this truth I just spit as reverse racism. That is white privilege. Thank you.
Okay, again, so I just ask you to lean into however you feel about any of that. And again, a lot of what she was describing is sort of what we just talked about with regard to these different components of ethnocentric multiculturalism and privilege. And so I want to move forward now just to talk very quickly about racial identity, and sort of the reason I feel like it's important to understand this is because how we interact with the people that we interface with, whether that's consumers, clients, students, whatever, our race and the way that we understand our race influences that interaction. And so one thing that I think is interesting to understand is that whiteness is very much a thing, even though white people seldom have to think about what it means to be white, because whiteness is so often equated with normal. Like, this is how it is. And so everything that's not white is like other. And so that's for you to think about. Whereas I truly believe, and a lot of scholars continue to argue, that, you know, conversations about racism, anti-racism, and the eradication of racism have to be centered in whiteness, because racism is rooted in whiteness. And so there's one model that I'm going to just very briefly mentioned, which is the Helms model of white racial identity development, which essentially consists of these 6 different identity statuses where people, white people acknowledge and abandon racism and then develop a sort of anti-racist identity. And so for anybody that's listening to me, anybody anywhere that's listening to this presentation right now, if you identify as a white person, I would absolutely invite you to think about that identity model and really think about where you might find yourself, where you think you may fall. And for people of color, this is a very general identity model for all racial and ethnic minorities that really starts, I don't know if you probably can't see my mouse, but it starts at this conformity stage and really moves through conformity being, you know, like I just sort of am totally aligned with dominant cultural values. There may be a lot of internalized racism. You then move through this stage of dissonance where it's kind of like, okay, that's not for me because I'm not treated like white people, so I'm obviously different. Excuse me. You then move into this stage that we call resistance and immersion, which is basically only surrounding yourself with people who look like you, and not really wanting anything to do with white people. Like we could just throw the white people away for all I care. And then moving into this place of introspection where you really start to consider like, okay, maybe that's not how I should feel. And then lastly, this stage of integrative awareness, which is where you can simultaneously hold that, you know, as a person of color, I'm oppressed. And that doesn't mean all white people are terrible. That doesn't mean we have to just put all of them away somewhere. And I use this picture of T'Challa and Eric Killmonger, rest in heaven to Chadwick Boseman. I use this picture of them because I think that if you haven't seen Black Panther, like I can't help you, but in Black Panther, I think that we really see in the film, we really see this on display where we see Killmonger, who is just ready to get rid of all the white people and blow them up and do all of this stuff because he and a lot of people were like, man, he ain't lying, but you know, he experienced a life full of racialized trauma and other types of trauma, and he was wanting to fight back, whereas we see, you know, King T'Challa, aka Black Panther, is like, nah, fam, we don't have to do all of that. And we see him at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, where he gets to the point where, you know, King T'Challa realizes that I can be Black and help people, and you know what I'm saying? And so we see him at that stage of integrative awareness. But anyways, we basically see in that film 2 different stages of minority identity development. And I could talk about that for days, but we ain't got time for all of that. So I'm going to continue forward talking a little bit about empathy. And so one thing I think it's important to understand, and basically what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about empathy and the sort of value of emotional intelligence and how we can use that in this sort of quest for racial justice and equity. So emotional intelligence is made up of these 5 different component parts. So, 5 different competencies. All are exactly what they sound like. We have self-awareness, empathy, motivation, self-regulation, and social skills. All of those things are exactly what they sound like. But just to give you a better idea, if you want to think about where you are with regard to emotional intelligence, like, is my emotional intelligence high? Is it high? Is it not? I invite you to think about these questions. So when you're thinking about your level of self-awareness, what emotions do you feel like you want to be more aware of? What are those emotions that sneak up on you? For me, it's anger. I go from 0 to the Hulk really, really quick. And I really wish I was more aware. I wish I had a more like anger that increased slowly and wasn't just like pew. But that's how it is for me. And that's something that for myself, I wish I was more aware of. But when you think about for you, what are some emotions that you feel like really sneak up on you? Self-regulation, what are some emotions that you experience that you feel like are disruptive? I always say that hunger is not an emotion, but hunger is something that's very disruptive to me. If I'm hungry, like it's about to be a mess. But think about those emotions that really, for me, sadness might be one of those. Like if I feel very sad about something, I feel like I can't concentrate and I can't go on about my day. Motivation wise, what things motivate you to be your best? And I think for me, that is, and I don't even know if this is emotion, but if someone like doubts me and I start to feel down about myself, that motivates me to be better because I want to prove people wrong, right? And so if you think about for yourself and your level of motivation with regard to emotional intelligence, what are those emotions that motivate you to be your best? And empathy, which is something we're going to talk about much more specifically. Empathy, how well are you able to, I would say, recognize and experience the emotions of another person. Now, that doesn't mean that I know exactly how you feel. That is not empathy, because no, you do not. What empathy is really being able to sit in a space with someone and be present with them and be and feel in that space. And when I say be present, that doesn't mean just sit there with them like, yep, I'm here, you're here, we're cool. Be present in a space that is shared, co-constructed with vulnerability and sort of feeling. And then lastly, when you think about social skills with regard to emotional intelligence, what emotions do you feel like support you socially? So when you're around people, and not socially like fun, but just when you're around any other people, what emotions do you feel like help you in those situations, and what hinder you? So what are those emotions that's like, ooh, if I feel this kind of way, it's not going to be a good situation. And where emotional intelligence, I think, is impactful and important with regard to racial justice is really two pieces: the self-awareness piece and the empathy piece. So being aware of the fact that assumptions are limiting. So if you look at someone and based on the way that they look, you already start to make up these things in your mind about how that person is and how they experience the world, you're limiting them and you're limiting yourself. You're limiting your ability to truly understand someone as they are. You're limiting yourself from being your true self. You know what I'm saying? So self-awareness, I think that self-awareness piece of emotional intelligence is so important, because we have to be mindful of how we are constricting our understandings of ourselves and of other people. We also have to acknowledge, and this is again, I think, where self-awareness and empathy comes in, everybody does not experience the world the way that you do. Your truth is your truth and yours alone. And so if you look at, again, if you assume that everyone has the same values, thoughts, feelings, beliefs as you, we're not being equitable, and we're not being present and inclusive in the way that we're engaging with folks if we just assume that because it happened to us, it happened to everybody else too. And so again, I think it's very important to sort of understand and acknowledge that self-awareness and empathy are vital in the way that we engage with folks if we really want to move towards a more equitable and just world along racial lines. And so I think where that presents itself is in cultural humility. And so I'm going to move quickly through this because I know we about to run out of time. And so I invite you all to think about your identity and how you see yourself on these three different levels. So there's a level of individual uniqueness. So as I said at the beginning, you are one of one. There's no one on this planet that is like you. So you have individual level characteristics that are unique to you and only you. You also have group level characteristics that can be shared with other people who have similar group identity statuses. So women, people of color, think about all those different ways people identify. You can share or not group level characteristics. And then lastly, we have characteristics that are existential or universal. So these are the common features of what it means to be a human being. Now, we don't have time to go into what all of those are. One, just to give you an example of what something like that is, every single human being is on this earth temporarily. Nobody gonna live forever. So one thing that binds us and connects us as human beings is temporality. I'm temporary in this space. And so again, I feel like there's always a bridge of connection that can be drawn between two people, even when it seems like we don't share any characteristics on it, obviously on an individual level, but on a group level, there's always some common features that we can fall back on. And so when we think about taking these concepts into practice, I think it's important to really think about these ideas of non-racism versus anti-racism. So non-racism is really having a cognitive understanding of what it means to not be terrible and not be a trash person. What does it mean to not engage in racist activities? Like understanding that cognitively, I'm not going to use the N-word. I'm going to shop at, Black businesses. This is non-racism, right? Anti-racism is taking all of that one step further and really working to dismantle these inequitable systems. So I'm not going to be racist. I'm also going to vote for people who are going to change these laws. I'm also going to do this and this and this and this. So non-racism is about comprehension and understanding, and anti-racism is about action. And we bout that action. You know what I'm saying? And so how we need to be about that action is in allyship. And so allies, especially, again, anybody who's listening to me who identifies as a white person, white racial allyship is essential to like racial justice and healing. And so allies are those people who recognize that you have privilege based on who you are. Rich people, men, white people, there are people who have privilege just based on who they are, and they utilize said privilege to, again, dismantle these systems. And again, when we talk about areas of race and racism, white racial allyship is essential. We are not going to change anything without white racial allies, because white people have, like, they have the power. They have the power in, you know what I'm saying, in the systems as they are currently constructed. And so we need people to come, you know, we need, like I said, we need people to be about that action. I'm not going to go through this because I don't have time. I invite you all to purchase this book by Dr. Maisa Akbar called Beyond Ally. It's very short. It's a very quick read. But if you really are trying to be about that life and engage in this sort of racial allyship and sort of racial justice work, I think you need to read this book, because she developed this whole model of allyship that really is very cohesive and talks a little bit about the difference between allyship and saviorism and people that's just out here for the gram and all of these different things, right? Like being able to understand all of those things. I highly recommend that book. I also recommend that everybody engage in these 10 things every single day, because everything on this list is free. 10 keys to everyday anti-racism. Every single thing on this list you can do for free. Educate yourself. Be intentional about what you do. Have the courage to stand up and say, you know what? That's not cool what you just said. Be yourself, walking your truth. You know, love your neighbor, love thy neighbor. And like I said, engage in this sort of anti-racist work and be about it. And everything, like I said, everything on this list you can absolutely do for free. For those of us who find ourselves, and myself included, I don't even like watching the news. I don't like watching the news because every day is something. Every day is something, and it's too much sometimes. So I just wanted to share with you all these strategies for taking care of yourself in the face of so much injustice, particularly when we're bombarded with it every single day. I know millennials don't like this. I know these young people out here don't like this. Take a break from social media. It'll be all right. It'll still be there when you come back. You can be informed without traumatizing yourself. Pay attention to your sleep and your diet. Sleep and diet affects our mental so much more than we know. As a therapist, working with people, that's one thing that we can do quickly and easily to help them to start to sort of feel better is, how are you eating and how are you sleeping? Stay connected to people who love you, who want to see you win. Surround yourself with people who want to see you win. And who are, I don't want to say like-minded because I don't like that language, but surround yourself with people who genuinely care about you. Be kind to yourself, allow yourself grace, because again, all of these shenanigans that we're dealing with, they did not come overnight, nor are they going to go away overnight. And lastly, get involved, whatever that looks like for you. For some people, that's being involved in activism. For some people, that's being involved in the work that you do in your day job and your 9 to 5. For some people like myself, that's counseling people who are out here doing this work. So whatever that looks like for you, get involved. And like I said, be about it. And so I'm not going to show this video because we don't have time, because it's time to go. But again, what I want to sort of leave everybody with is that what I'm talking about is not conceptual. These are people, this is life. These are people's lived experiences. This is lived life. Microaggressions are not something that is conceptual. That happens every single day to people. And the work that we do is so important. And having an understanding of how racism affects people on a day-to-day will only inform us to do that work in a much more genuine and authentic way. And really, and again, I want to stress the importance of racism is not only about, again, changing hearts and minds, it's about changing systems. And whatever we can do at every level of these systems, right? So in your workplace, in your church, like whatever we're talking about, right? What can we do at each of these levels to make the world a better place for people of color? Because right now it's kind of janky out here. You know what I'm saying? And making the world a place where, again, Black and brown kids don't have to worry about being arrested by the school resource officer. You know what I'm saying? And so we're talking about lived experience. I just want everyone to understand that nothing that I'm talking about is conceptual. We talk about people's real lives. As someone who just transitioned out of practice, who works primarily with people of color, with women of color, these are people's real lives. And so this is just a resource sheet. I can find some kind of way to get this to folks. If you have any interest in really engaging in this work in a more, organized way, I guess. If you need any resources around anti-racism, these are some. And I know we have to go, so I will leave it at that. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, I will just linger here creepily for a little bit to be able to do so. But if not, if there are people, for the online people, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and attention. If there are people in the room that I can't see, I appreciate your time and attention. And thank you so much. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.